It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ViewSonic XG341C-2K. The OSD is controlled by a joystick at the rear of the screen along the right hand side, as viewed from the front. If you press that, unlike many menu systems, that doesn't count as enter and it doesn't get you into a little quick menu, it actually turns the monitor off. If you twiddle the joystick left, then you get this little quick access menu, and you can customize what this shows. So there's blue light filter, custom 1, custom 2, and return. There are 3 different things you can assign here. So if you go into the main menu, and to do that you twiddle the joystick up, then go to setup menu, you'll see it is listed here as quick access, and you can select 3 different things here. Blue light filter, there's pure XP, I'll just turn this off so you can see the others as well. Pure XP on and off, overclocking, and I will explore these when I get to them in the main menu. FPS, MOBA, Battle Royale, so these are the presets. Realistic, Vibrant, Console Speed, Console Color, Custom 1, Custom 2. So those are your options. And with the blue light filter, it turns it on when you select it. It doesn't toggle it off. If I select it again with the quick access, it doesn't turn it off. But you'll see if I cycle to one of my other presets, which I have listed here, it enables the preset without that blue light filter on top. If you twiddle the joystick down, then it also opens the main menu system. If you twiddle it to the right, then you can select the input used by the monitor. When you're actually in the main menu system, you can press the joystick in to actually select an option. You'll see when I cycle through these presets, it actually takes a while for them to activate. It's a little bit annoying actually. It's a bit slow in that respect. And also, if you're quite deep into the menu, with most joystick menu systems, so let's say I'm here somewhere, I have to press left, then I have to press left again, then I have to press up to get out of the menu system. Usually you'd be able to just hold the joystick left or something like that to exit, or there'd be a separate button which you could use to exit, or you could just press the same thing a few times to exit. But in this case, you have to be conscious of how deep you are in the menu, and then press specific combination of keys to get out of it, which is really quite janky. Anyway, I'm just going to quickly go through these presets. So there's standard, custom 1, custom 2, FPS, MOBA, Battle Royale, Realistic, Vibrant, Console Speed, and Console Color. Don't pay much attention to what these are called. You may like to use the FPS for FPS, but to be honest, you don't get any special features here. All it does when you activate one of these named presets is that it will change things by default in the menu, and it will also lock off certain options. So in the case of most of these presets, color temperature is not available, so you can't adjust to red, green, and blue color channels. And if you go to color adjust, you'll see gamma, color saturation, and black stabilization are not available either. And in image adjust, you can't adjust the sharpness. And this monitor is actually a little bit over sharp in my opinion by default, so be aware of that. It's the same with MOBA, Battle Royale, Realistic, Vibrant, Console Speed, and Console Color. Realistic is an odd name to give a preset. It doesn't make it realistic. It doesn't clamp the gamut. This is a wide gamut monitor, so this is not a realistic look to things. It just is a different look, over sharp. Again, you can't adjust the color, temperature, and that kind of thing. And the same with Console Speed, Console Color. They just make different adjustments. You may like how they look, in which case feel free to use them, but really if you just stick to standard, custom 1 or custom 2, you have full customization options in the OSD. It doesn't lock anything off. So if I go to color temperature, I can control the color channels or set it to one of the preset values. And color adjust, it's all unlocked as well. So gamma, color saturation, and black stabilization is available. You can also rename custom 1 and custom 2 if you find you're using 2 presets for different things and you like to switch between them. And that is in setup menu, right down at the bottom. Rename, and that allows you to rename that to something else. Next you've got display, FreeSync Premium Pro. This is the adaptive sync toggle of the monitor, so you would use this if you want to use NVIDIA's G-Sync compatible mode or AMD FreeSync with a compatible system or GPU. You can use NVIDIA's G-Sync compatible mode on this monitor using HDMI 2.1 VRR if you're using HDMI 2.1. So you can activate HDMI 2.1 VRR without having this activated, but for adaptive sync, you do need to have FreeSync Premium Pro active in the OSD. And for reasons only known to ViewSonic, and I've actually let them know about this, and they seem to be a bit surprised, which is odd because I've actually been able to confirm that other units have the same issue, so it's not just with mine. It locks off your brightness control, amongst other things, when you've got this activated. So I've just activated FreeSync Premium Pro HDR. I'll just turn that off just so you can see. I'll come back to that. It's a toggle. It doesn't really matter if you've got that set to display HDR. The system's giving an SDR signal. It is not HDR. Yet for some reason, brightness is grayed out. And as explored in the review, it's locked at a rather high brightness, much higher than I'd like to use. So it really is an odd limitation. Next, you've got that HDR toggle, which I've just briefly talked about. Different modes here. You might have noticed that Cinematic HDR and Gameplay HDR were grayed out when I was using FreeSync Premium Pro. On my NVIDIA GPU, these are all the same anyway, Display HDR, Cinematic HDR and Gameplay HDR, but it may depend on your GPU, it may depend on your system. But I would recommend keeping this at Display HDR, which will really give you the most accurate HDR output. Again, there are some caveats to be aware of, and that's all explored in the review. But if you have this activated, then it isn't a weird emulation mode or anything when you're using SDR, or it shouldn't be. I say it shouldn't be because for some reason with my NVIDIA GPU, when I was using DisplayPort, it messed up the image if I had an SDR signal and I had this activated in the OSD. So I had to keep switching between Display HDR on and off depending on whether my signal was SDR or HDR. But with HDMI 2.1, I don't have that issue, and I didn't have that issue with my AMD GPU either, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. So my basic recommendation is leave this set to your preferred mode, Display HDR for example, which you'd use for HDR, even when you're using SDR, unless things look clearly messed up under SDR for some reason, and this is with an SDR signal by the way, you haven't activated HDR on Windows or anything like that, then set this to off, unless you're actually using HDR. Phew. So next there's local dimming, all explored in the review, level 1, 2, 3, 4 and off, and this controls the amount of dark or light biasing that goes on, again explored in the review. Pure XP, also explored in the review. This is a strobe backlight setting which causes the backlight to flicker at a frequency matching the refresh rate of the display. It supports 100 Hz, 144 Hz and 165 Hz. As explored in the review, it's not particularly good, but you can use it if you really like to and really need to. Overclocking. So what this will do is it will unlock a 200 Hz option for the monitor. Unfortunately, this is not a guaranteed overclock. So you'll see now 200 Hz is listed. I can select that. As I said, it's not guaranteed to work, and on my unit it doesn't work. No issue with my GPU, I'm using an RTX 3090, so there's no limitation there, but my unit just doesn't support 200 Hz. That's my monitor, without frame skipping. And I've confirmed with a few other people that their unit also doesn't support this. So basically expect it not to work. And if it does happen to work, there are some restrictions. So you can't use FreeSync Premium Pro, you can't use VRR at all, so you can't use HDMI 2.1 VRR either. You can't activate local dimming and you can't activate Pure XP. And HDR is also unavailable. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I seem to think that that might have been available with DisplayPort. And if I change to 165 Hz or any of the other lower refresh rates, you might think that some of those options would now be available. However, they are not. They remain unavailable. You need to actually disable the overclocking feature to get them back, which is really awkward and annoying. Although if the overclocking feature doesn't actually work and just skips frames at 200 Hz, it's really neither here nor there. Next up, you've got Hertz Limiter. This is another feature with which for whatever reason doesn't work, doesn't do anything on my unit. I've selected 144 Hz. The system is running at 165 Hz. The monitor is also running at 165 Hz. And I verified with various tests that it is actually 165 Hz. It was exactly the same as it was before. What this would ideally do is it would change the refresh rate of your system at the same time and your monitor. But this doesn't do anything of the sort. It just stays at 165 Hz. It may depend on your system or how you've got it connected up perhaps. So if it does change your refresh rate and you want to use that, then that's fine. Alternatively, it could be some sort of pseudo refresh rate limit, which is really awkward because it's basically the system is running at whatever refresh rate you've selected, but then it limits it sort of like a hard frame rate limiter, even though your refresh rate is not matching it, so you're going to get lots of stuttering and that kind of thing. So it's not really a particularly useful feature, but it's there if you need to use it, and it actually happens to work. Next is a feature that does work, response time OD. So you can set that to standard, fast, faster, ultra fast, or fastest, and that is explored in the review. Blue light filter, also explored in the review, but I like to mention it here. This is a low blue light setting. The higher the value, the stronger the low blue light effect. So that is to say that the reduction in blue light is more significant the higher this is. If you select the blue light filter option with the quick access like I showed you before, this will just toggle it on to 100, so all the way up. And that's the strongest effect. It does work very well. It's also well balanced for a low blue light setting because it doesn't give you a strange green or yellow tint like some settings of this sort do. You then got color temperature, which I showed you briefly before. There's bluish, cool, native. So bluish gives a very cool tint. It's a high white point. Cool gives a somewhat cool tint, so a slightly high white point. Native's the factory default. White is sort of like a mild low blue light setting, really. It's as if you've set the blue light filter some of the way up, but not all the way up. And there's full color control, which allows you to manually adjust the red, green, and blue color channels. Next up, you've got color adjust. You can adjust the color space, RGB, YUV, or auto. If you don't know what to do, just keep it on auto. Most systems will be using RGB. And if you happen to have selected the wrong thing, YUV, then things are going to look really green and odd. So if you happen to find your monitor looks really green and odd, it's probably because you've accidentally selected the wrong color space here. If in doubt, just select auto and it should sort it out for you based on your system. But in most cases, it's going to be RGB. Color range, so you can select full range or limited range signal. If you need to enforce a limited range RGB signal, use full range RGB signal, or could be a YUV signal, I guess. Auto should really be matching what your system requires. In most cases, it will be a full range signal, but there are some systems, I believe the Nintendo Switch, for example, which will prefer a limited range signal. So if you select auto, it should sort it out. But if things don't look right to you, then select one of the others, have a play with that. There's a gamma setting. You can set this to various values. But on my unit, the actual measured gamma didn't match what it's saying in the OSD here. So really these should have probably been just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 instead of trying to give exact values, because that can be a bit misleading. So you can see I've got 2.0 applied, and that actually is closest to 2.2 on my unit. Might not be the case on yours though. Color saturation, set this to 50, that's the correct neutral point. If you increase this, and it's actually increased to 55 by default with the custom 1 setting, then it increases saturation, and it does this by pulling shades closer to the edge of the gamut without expanding the gamut itself, so you lose shade variety. Some people do like the extra punchy, cartoony look, in which case that's fine, you can do that. You do you. If you want to decrease the saturation a bit, you can do so by decreasing this, but I would say that even at 45, which is a fairly small decrease, you do lose a bit of saturation. The problem is that some shades become heavily undersaturated and things can look a bit foggy, whereas other shades remain quite saturated. It's very difficult to get the balance right, but if you want to do that and you just want to change things according to your taste in terms of saturation, you can certainly do that. Next up, you've got black stabilization. That is set to 11 by default, or it should be. That is the correct neutral point. I've got legom.nl, the website, the black levels tests, open in the background so you can have a vague idea of what this does. It won't look exactly on the video as it would to the eye, but it gives you a bit of an idea. If you increase this, it will make dark shades more visible. And it does this without the kind of dramatic effect on contrast that some settings of this sort do. So it actually works quite well in that respect. So if you want a competitive edge, you want to see enemies more clearly in the dark, then you can increase this according to your taste. If you decrease it so it's lower than 11, then it starts crushing things together. A lot of these shades look darker than they should. Could give a potentially more punchy look, so just according to your preferences, do feel free to have a play with that. But remember that 11 is the correct neutral point, and that will give you the most accurate output. Next, you've got image adjust. There's ViewScale. So these are the scaling settings of the monitor. So there's full aspect and 1:1. They apply when you're running a non-native resolution. I'll show you that very shortly, but I'm just going to quickly show you that there are some other options as well. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there is 19-inch 4:3, 19-inch 16:10, 21.5-inch 16:9, 22-inch 16:10, 23.6-inch 16:9, and 24-inch 16:9. So I'll just activate that one just to show you that it's simulating a 24-inch 16:9 screen, and there's a black border around that. It has squished it up though. It looks a bit odd. It may depend on the resolution you're actually running as to how this will look, but it still does simulate the 24-inch screen size with a 16:9 aspect ratio. If you're running at a resolution and refresh rate where interpolation is supported, and if you look at the interpolation and upscaling section of the written review, there's a little bit more about that because it doesn't support it at all refresh rates or resolutions. So an example of one where it is supported, 2560 by 1440, 1440p QHD resolution at 120 Hz. I've got the full setting selected right now, so that means it's using the entirety of the screen. And it stretches things across. It looks very odd because this is a 16:9 resolution I've selected and this is a 21:9 aspect screen. However, if I select the aspect option, it will make sure it looks at the aspect of the resolution I've selected, which is 16:9, and it won't distort things. So because it's the 2560 by 1440 resolution and this is a 3440 by 1440 screen, this means that this particular resolution is displayed without any interpolation. This is very much as if you're looking at a QHD 27-inch screen. There are black borders at the side though, so they've just blanked out the extra horizontal pixels, in other words. And based on what I've just said, the 1:1 setting, which is a pixel mapping setting, that should look exactly the same, as it's only using the pixels called for in the source resolution, except in this case, for some reason, it fills the screen and is the same as using full. If I switch over to the full HD resolution, then this 1:1 setting correctly displays full HD in the middle of the screen without any distortion, without any interpolation, extra pixels not used in the source resolution, they're just blacked out around the image. So that's how the 1:1 setting should look. And then for completeness, to show you aspect, it's not distorted as in it's not stretched, but interpolation is used for this particular resolution. So things do look somewhat softer as a result of this. Again, the interpolation process is explored in the written review. And full will do that, stretching it across the entire screen using all of the screen space. And because this is a 16:9 resolution and a 21:9 screen, things look stretched and odd. You've then got your basic controls such as contrast, brightness, sharpness, and sharpness is in increments of 25. The default setting is 75, which I found quite a bit too sharp. But this is just something you can adjust according to preferences. I found 25 more neutral and more as I'd expect to see. But again, according to your own preferences. Advanced DCR, dynamic contrast ratio setting, and that is explored in the written review. If you increase this, it adds extra sharpness, but doesn't really change what the dynamic contrast setting's doing. So 1 is activated with the lowest sharpness, 0 is deactivated, which is my preferred choice here, of course. Overscan, if you want the image to flow off the screen, and for some systems this makes sense, but I know some people like to do this for competitive reasons as well. So it looks like it's sort of zoomed in really, it flows off the edge of the screen with a little bit of a zoom as well. So if that's what you need to do, that's what you can do with the overscan setting. Next up is input select, which is exactly the same as what I showed with the little quick menu just before. There's view mode, and these are only available in certain presets, but they're sort of additional sub presets if you like. They'll make various other changes to the image, so if you select web, for example, it will change the gamma, the brightness, all sorts of other things to various, in this case, quite wacky values. And then if I go to display, down to color adjust, you'll see that gamma's grayed out, so I can't change what it's doing with gamma there. So it just really restricts you. If you're finding some things are grayed out and you've got your game mode set to custom, then it might be because your view mode isn't set to standard. The other one that is quite interesting is mono, I suppose, and this makes everything monochrome. Next is audio adjust. You can change the volume of the integrated speakers or mute them, or something which is connected to the 3.5mm jack if you're using that. The integrated speakers on this model are explored a little bit in the written review. They're okay, I mean they're better than some, but they're not the best I've heard by any means. And then you've got setup menu, which I briefly showed you before. There are lots of options here. You can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. There's information, and this can be quite useful actually if you want to know if VRR is working and doing its thing, because V there, the V frequency, will change according to the frame rate of the content if you're using VRR. So you can see that that's doing its thing, and if it's within the variable refresh rate range, which seems to be 55 to 165 Hz, although they will advertise 48 to 165 Hz, but it just gives you an indication that VRR is actually active and doing something. There's quick access, which I've shown you. There's an on-screen crosshair feature, type A, type B, type C, and you can change it between green, white, and yellow. So type B, type C is just a simple dot, So I'll just show you that. Type B yellow. And you'll see it says adjust as well, so you can use the joystick now to adjust the position of the crosshair on the screen. There's Elite RGB, which I will come back to very shortly. Resolution notice. This will just display a notice on the screen if the monitor's running at non-native resolution, just to remind you what the native resolution is, I believe. Boot up screen just shows a splash screen when it starts up. If you set this to off, as far as I can see, it doesn't really make the startup much quicker. There's OSD timeout, so that's how long after the last button press before the OSD will automatically disappear. It can be set to 5, 15, 30 or 60 seconds. OSD background if you want a little transparency effect, or if you prefer things to be somewhat more visible, then you can have that set to on rather than off. On is actually the default anyway. Multi-picture, so this is the picture-in-picture, picture-by-picture functionality of the monitor. So I'm not going to be able to show you this in any particular detail because I've only got one source selected, as I often do. You can see that when I select PBP, it'll have one half of the screen showing one source and the other could show another source. Just the usual, two-system PBP, picture-by-picture. And there are a few associated options, so you can select the left source and the right source, you can swap them, and you can choose which port you want for the audio output. If you're using Type-C for one of your ports, I don't have any Type-C systems to hand, so I can't show this, I'm afraid, but it has KVM functionality associated with it. You have to be using picture-by-picture for this to be a thing, which is a bit odd. It's not usually how monitors do things, but that's how they've done it here. They've tied it to the picture-by-picture setting. And according to the manual at least, if I press the joystick right, it should allow me to select which source I want to use for the USB or something like that. Again, I can't do it myself because I don't have that system connected, so I can't see what it's supposed to be doing. But if you want to use KVM and you want to be using picture-by-picture, you can do that. Really, most people will want to be actually using KVM without picture-by-picture. They've got multiple systems connected and they just want to focus on one system at a time with the display and switch the USB peripherals between systems without necessarily using picture-by-picture. So I don't know why they've done it this way, but that's what they've done anyway. And there's PIP, picture-in-picture. And this will give you a little sub-source box on the screen, top left by default, and the rest of the image will be your main source. And you can see you can change the source used for the sub-source, the position of it horizontally and vertically. So there's lots of flexibility in terms of where it's actually displaying on the screen, which is nice. You can change the size of it as well. And you can swap the primary source and the sub-source. And you can also control the audio output used. Next, there's power indicator. That's just the little blue LED towards the bottom right there. You can turn that off if you prefer. Next, there's auto power off, and what that will do is it will allow the screen to switch off if no signal is detected for a short period of time. So say your system goes to sleep or your system shuts down and no signal's being sent to the monitor for a bit, then it will turn it off as if you press the power button. Something I've noticed is sometimes when I'm using the monitor with HDMI, it always wakes from sleep for me correctly. And if I'm using this auto power off and it's turned the monitor off, if I then press the power button, the monitor will always spring to life normally. But for some reason, if I press the power button myself to turn the monitor off and then I turn it on again with the power button and my system is fully on, it's on Windows, whatever, it's on a game, then it doesn't always come back to life when I'm using HDMI 2.1. It then has this little thing on the screen that says change to HDMI 2.0 for your signal. If I press yes, then it will work, but I'll then have to go back into setup menu, go to HDMI 2.0 and select off there. It'll be set to on if it's using HDMI 2.0. So just be aware of this. I didn't have this with DisplayPort, but you might perhaps. So if you do come across this issue where the monitor isn't turning on and it is asking you to switch to HDMI 2.0, then do that. Perhaps happen with DisplayPort as well, because there is a DisplayPort version thing. So these are for compatibility purposes, HDMI 2.0, and if I was using DisplayPort, there'd be DisplayPort 1.2 there. If you want to use a full functionality of the monitor, HDMI 2.0 should be off because you use HDMI 2.1, and DisplayPort 1.2 should be off because you're using DisplayPort 1.4. So if you just don't press that power button to turn the monitor off, so you can use the auto power off and it does it itself, that's fine. It's not going to have this issue anyway, or shouldn't. And if the monitor just goes to sleep, so its power LED will be going amber, and you're not using auto power off, then it should wake up fine from sleep as well. But it should spring back to life when you've got your system connected up and it's started up. So it was a really awkward one. I didn't really know how to fit that in. A little signal issue I occasionally had with HDMI 2.1. At least there are some workarounds, but it shouldn't really happen at all. Next there's sleep, so that will just turn the monitor off after a given amount of time, 30, 45, 60 or 120 minutes. Eco mode. Set this to standard for the full brightness range of the monitor. If you set this to optimize or conserve, then it will limit your brightness. It doesn't change the brightness if you've got it set to 0, minimum brightness, but anything above that will be cut down somewhat compared to if you're using standard. And there's energy saving, which will restrict various other settings as well. But you don't really have to worry about these things. I mean, it's sort of a bit of a nanny setting, which I like to call it. If you just set the brightness quite conservatively, then that will minimize energy use. And yes, when you're using HDR and you've got high brightness, that will increase energy use. But why have you bought this monitor if you're not going to be using the mini LED backlight? I've got no idea. So this is just a little compliance type mode. You can set the USB-C port to USB 3.2. So it's if you want to change the balance of data transfer rate versus your signal. If you're finding that your signal's not right, you're not getting the full capabilities because it has DisplayPort alt mode. If it's not giving you the full DP 1.4 alt mode capabilities, then perhaps it's because you've got this set incorrectly. So do check that out. DSC, display stream compression. You want to have this set to on if you want to use the full functionality of the monitor. It's just there for compatibility. If you wish to, you can turn it off. DDC/CI, part of the plug and play functionality of the monitor, allows you to use certain software to control the OSD. HDMI 2.0, which I've gone through. DisplayPort 1.2, grayed out, I've also gone through. Standby charger, if you want to use the USB ports when the monitor is in standby, you can do that. Set that to on. If you have it set to on, even if you're not using those USB ports, it will actually increase the standby power consumption of the monitor slightly. I showed you this before. You can rename your preset, and memory recall, which will reset everything to the factory defaults. So the only thing I haven't gone through so far is the really exciting Elite RGB feature, which I may or may not have said sarcastically. So the various different settings here, there isn't really a lot of flexibility, to be honest, in the OSD. You can set it to breathing, rainbow, stack or waterfall. You can't select the color or anything like that. So I've got it set to breathing, and you might be able to see a gentle glow behind the monitor. The room's dark, so you can't see that, but it isn't bright enough to be a bias light or anything like that. It's a fairly gentle glow, just gives a little bit of ambience. So you'll see towards the top left, top right, bottom left and bottom right at the rear of the screen. That's where you'll find the RGB LED strips. So the breathing setting is just blue, sort of a cool icy blue. There's rainbow. A little bit difficult to see that on the video, but it's actually cycling through the rainbow on each of the RGB LED strips. And you can also see it a little bit on the desk actually. There aren't any LEDs at the bottom, but they do shine through a vent towards the bottom of the monitor. So you can actually see something on your desk as well. But again, it's really not very bright. You've got a stack setting, which is just another animation type. It's a bit of a darker blue, this one, compared to the breathing one. And then there's waterfall. Do you think this will be a blue colour as well? No, it cycles between various different colours. I'll just show you this one from beneath the monitor. So this one cycles various different colours. There's also software called Elite Display Controller, and this is supposed to allow you to control the monitor. Various different settings you can adjust there. For some reason it doesn't work for me. I don't know if it's because this model's too new and it doesn't work. You do have to have the USB upstream cable connected. That's the Type B cable with a square-shaped connector. No idea why it's not working, but anyway, if it did work, you can adjust a few different things here. And also select RGB, which would allow you to change the colour of the RGB LEDs, and there are a few different modes as well. Unfortunately, when I click anything there, it just disappears, it just kills the program. So again, no idea what's going on there, it doesn't work. And there's also RGB Alliance, so if you want to be using Razor Chroma or Thermaltake's RGB Plus software, then it can also take control of those elite RGB LEDs of the monitor. Just be aware again that they're not super bright. It does give you a bit of ambience in a dark room, but it's not going to be a useful bias light or be something you're really going to notice if the room isn't dark. And this system, which allows you to select the monitor that you're controlling. You can update the software as well. It says it's up to date. You can update the firmware of the monitor. Also says it's up to date. And it just shows you the name of the monitor, in case you forget, XG341C-2K. And that's really all there is to that monitor. Be sure to check out the full review on pcmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do. Be aware that liking the video, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, also a nice way of showing your support.